Happy Thursday, everyone. We will get started in about one more minute. We'll be started right here at about 6:30 Central Time. So we'll get started in one more minute. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. It's great to spend the evening with all of you. I hope you're staying warm wherever you are. Some areas that's a little more challenging than others. I know I was outdoors a bit this week, and my goodness, earlier in the week, it was here in Texas, it was in the 50s. And for me, that's freezing cold. I was talking to some people that work in our company up in North Dakota yesterday. And I said, "What's the temperature up there in North Dakota?" And he goes, "Oh my goodness, we are sweating. The doors are open. Everybody's in t-shirts." He said, "It's 30 degrees. We are burning up here." So I guess it's a matter of perspective and where you're used to. But I know, having always lived in Texas, I am not well accustomed to the cold weather. But our bees are mostly indoors, overwintered in sheds. Personally, my bees, and so they're nice and warm. And then a lot of our crews are in California right now, working bees where it's nice and warm. But here in Texas, it's certainly getting chilly, which we will talk about quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and start the recording, and then we will get started tonight. We've got a lot of ground to cover this evening. In case I haven't met you, my name is Blake, and I'm one of the owners of the Bee Supply, and I've been a beekeeper for over 20 years now. I started as a small scale beekeeper, and then went to a sideline beekeeper, and then eventually a commercial beekeeper. But as all of you that routinely watch this video know, our focus is small scale beekeepers and taking the lessons that I've learned and other team members of TBS have learned from keeping bees at all scale and applying them to a small scale or sideline beekeeping operation. And we always really try to focus with our education on practical beekeeping. That's always been a passion of mine, is making sure that we're giving practical information that you can go out and use. And so that's always a focus for us here at TBS. So welcome, and let's get started. So right off the bat, we have a phenomenal magazine. Sherry, I will turn it over to you guys, broadcasting live from the uh, Texas Beekeepers Association conference meeting. So I'll let you take it away from here.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Great. Because I wasn't sure. We are traveling, so you never know, right? Do y'all love that cover or what? That's a beautiful photo by a wonderful friend of mine, that we need to put us into our prayers. She's battling cancer, and it's been a tough road for her. So let's all pray for Jennifer Brown as she struggles through that. But what a beautiful photo this beekeeper took. The November issue is packed full of, golly, can you believe we're talking about November? We're nearly to the end. Tons of stuff in this issue. Planning ahead. That's a quick little article I wrote about hive stands and layouts, apiary layouts. Those of you that are just getting started, or even if you're needing to redo, you ought to check that out. It's got some pretty good tips in it, I think. When to give up on a hive, not you, but the hive. Don't give up on you, even if you make a mistake here and there. That's a super good article. Blake wrote that, and another that ties to it. So check those pages out. Winter hive inspections, we need to be doing that. All of us need to read that and get filled in of how that needs to go. Propolis. I wrote a real quick on there that says caution, propolis ahead. We don't really think about that, but we need to pay close attention that when we're making those winter inspections, that we don't pop and get rid of too much of that propolis. The bees need it. All right, so let's flip me over to the other slide there, Blake. Excellent. I chose this article. So my guest expert this month was Dr. Jamie Ellis, and it's also in that issue. If you'll go in and look at that, listen to that whole video, at the tail end of it, you'll get another snippet where I talk to him about the dreaded yellow-legged hornet. This little bug is a potential problem. I don't want this article to scare you. This needs to be an education only article. I bullet pointed what I thought was things that we all as beekeepers need to be doing. If you've not heard about the yellow-legged hornet, this was found in Georgia in September. It's an insect, and you see the picture there is a yellow-legged hornet found in Georgia in September on a kind of by fluke by a beekeeper, but Europe has had them for a decade or more. And having that behind us kind of makes me feel better anyway. And I told Dr. Ellis that in our interview. But a couple of points that I wanted to point out is we are all going to have to stay on top of this. It's something that we're going to hope doesn't breach the borders of Georgia, but the odds that it are there. When you look at Varroa and how it's traveled around, we might need to pay close attention to that. But something that I thought was pretty interesting about it is it's a single queen is what overwinters, not a whole colony like our Apis mellifera does. In the late winter and early spring, the queen emerges with the ability to completely form a hive. We've always thought, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we could just have a queen and plant her and start a whole hive? Well, yeah, but this one actually can. And from that, she can do everything a worker can do. And from that, on those bullet points, it goes down through basically the life cycle of the yellow-legged hornet, and pretty much makes us all realize that we have a colony of bees built from that paralyzes our colony by hawking. And it's basically what it does is it gets at the front, lands on the landing of our hives facing out, and every bee that comes in, they bite their heads off, start chewing on them, chew them up, and they feed the meat to their brood that they're grazing. So they are kind of like carnivorous, right? It's kind of a strange bug that we're dealing with here. So the silver lining is Europe's already been through it and have been going through it, and they're dealing with it by setting out traps. So we'll get there if we have to deal with it. We've got them on our side. So check it out. It's a good article. I think it's good. There's also some clickets in there of how to report one if you were to see it. And I think it ought to be something you ought to read. So there you go. Back to you, Blake.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. And yeah, I mean, we'll certainly be keeping you guys up to date with the latest research on the yellow-legged hornet as well. I mean, that's certainly something I'm watching carefully as a beekeeper, and we'll again keep you guys up to date as we learn more about it. But this is a great proactive article where you can learn what might be coming, and we'll certainly find ways to battle it too if it continues to spread. So, and thanks again to James and Sherry for joining us, even though they're at a conference. And if you're going to the Texas Beekeepers Conference, I'll be there tomorrow, and James and Sherry will be there tomorrow as well. So a couple quick things before we jump in. We do have our bees for sale. And so we have our Golden Cordovans, our Texas 5000s, Nooks, singles, packages, and queens. And they're available for pre-order. Sales are super strong and going pretty quickly. So again, if you want those early dates, now's the time to book them so that they don't book up too quickly and you don't get the dates that you want. So definitely, if you're new to beekeeping, now's the time to get pre-orders in before everything books up. I did want to talk just briefly about this. This is something that we've been playing with for about a year now. So you guys are probably fairly familiar with our Golden Cordovan breed, and that's a breed that's unique to us at TBS. And so we set out with the goal of breeding and selling the gentlest bee we could possibly get. So for those that wanted to keep bees in your backyard or around lots of kids or in a really urban environment, and we did, and so the golden cordovan is an extremely gentle bee. One of the things that you often find when you're breeding bees is that as you emphasize or prioritize is a better word, as you prioritize a certain trait, um, you really have to breed for that trait, and it's harder to prioritize all the other traits as well. And so, a common problem as you have really gentle bees is they may not be as tough when it comes to varroa mites or foul broods, or they may not just be as resilient. They can be super gentle, but not super resilient. And so we've always bred for those other traits as well. But to be honest, we accomplished our goal of gentleness, but they just weren't as tough and resilient as I wanted. And so for 2024, we're changing that breed. And so what we're doing is we're taking our super gentle golden cordovan and we're breeding it, we're crossing it with our really tough Texas 5000 breed. And so for 2024, our golden cordovans, we're trying to achieve kind of that best of both worlds where they're still really gentle, but they're crossed with our Texas 5000s, which will give them a lot more of that durability than they've had in the past. So you can see the picture on the left. A lot of times our golden cordovans are really light in color. And we experimented with them this year. And you might have actually gotten some of them if you got our golden cordovan breed. But they look a little more like the ones on the right, where they're still light-ish, but they're going to kind of have some bands on them, and some are a little bit darker in color. And so we're kind of going to that hybrid where they'll still be super gentle, but should also be a little bit tougher as well. So anyway, just kind of fun. One day we should do a video on all of that, but something fun we've been playing with. Golden cordovan, our global pollen patties, our standard global pollen patties, our pollen patties with complete or rocket fuel are all available in stock. So definitely we'll be talking about that more later tonight, but certainly stock up on pollen patties, use them in November. And then if you have any leftover, you can put them in the freezer and then you can put them on in January. If you are new to beekeeping and haven't taken a beginning beekeeping class, highly recommend a beginning beekeeping class. Here's a 10% off coupon if you want to take any of our virtual classes. I'm sorry, any of our in-person classes. So we have in-person classes, Austin, Dallas, Houston. And then we also have virtual classes if you want to take a beginning beekeeping class. So check that out. Okay, so before we really jump into the bee yard, I want to talk a little bit about the National Honey Board. So I was at the National Honey Board meeting this past week in Boulder, Colorado. And their website is honey.com. This is a nonprofit organization. There's about 15 of us that are on the board, and it's two honey packers, two beekeepers, or three honey packers, three beekeepers, three importers. So we've got the entire industry covered or represented there. And then the National Honey Board is a government sanctioned board that kind of promotes honey in the United States. And we've got about $10 million budget, and that money comes from assessments. So packers who package and sell honey on a large scale have to pay 2 cents for every pound of honey that they sell. And those 2 cents per pound go to the National Honey Board, and then the Honey Board promotes honey in the US. So it's a super cool organization. I've been a part of it for a long time, and there's a ton of resources if you go to honey.com, educational resources, informational, statistics, etc. And it's always a fun meeting. The meetings are open to the public. So if you ever want to go to just a fascinating beekeeping honey industry meeting, it's a really fun one to go to. It snowed like a foot in Boulder the last day, so that was exciting. I was almost snowed in, but managed to get out. There's some really cool stuff. I'm going to run over some quick data that came out at this fall meeting a couple of days ago. There's a ton more information where this came from, but I'm not going to read off all of this if you're worried. But if you guys want to go back and watch the recording and pause or take a picture of some of these slides, it's some really helpful information. And the Honey Board is the only organization that really does a lot of consumer studies on what consumers are interested in when it comes to honey and bees. And this cool slide here talks just about honey is still top of mind in the consumer's mind. And so they recall very positive stories about honey. They use it in a wide array of occasions. They have a huge preference for honey. And honey continues as a sweetener continues to rise above the rest. This one is so cool. So honey is the second most favorite sweetener, with 26% of shoppers rating it as their favorite, and 28% of shoppers rate white sugar as their favorite. So honey and sugar tend to flip-flop back and forth about every year. So honey is super popular when it comes to people's preferred sweetener. 58% of people report using honey multiple times a month. It's the number one sweetener used in beverages, including tea and coffee. And then 46% of people believe honey is somewhat or good for honeybees. And that's where we have a little bit of work to do. The consumers can be confused as to whether it's a good thing or not to harvest honey. And then 2/3 of shoppers say that they're aware of the declining honeybees, which is good. That awareness is super helpful as an industry. This one's really interesting in that it shows that the reason that people buy honey or are planning to increase their honey usage. So this, if you're thinking about selling honey, this is a great chart. Oops, sorry. This is a great chart that shows what people like about honey. So, number one is the flavor. Others believe it's healthier. It's good for my digestive system. It's natural sugar, therapeutic qualities, prefer the taste, source of vitamins. So this is a great list to look through as you're trying to market and sell your honey. This tells you what is most important to the shopper. I threw up this one just because I think it's so relevant to a lot of you as small scale or sideline beekeepers. What I love about this is where people buy honey. Look at number 3. Number 3 is farmers markets. So obviously number 1 is traditional grocer supermarket. Number 2 is supercenter grocery stores. But number 3, that is an incredible number of consumers that are wanting or do buy honey from farmers markets. And farmers markets would be probably lumped in with other, mom and pop stores, feed stores, etc. So that's pretty positive and pretty amazing for you as a beekeeper. Price is the most commonly criticized issue when it comes to issues with shoppers and honey. So honey is very expensive. That's the most common, and it's been that way for a while. That's often the most common complaint we hear from consumers. And then pure, raw, unfiltered has gained relevance. And so if you're interested in more data on that, there's a lot on that in the Honey Board website. But year over year, people continue to want honey that's pure, unfiltered, and raw. That has absolutely continued to increase. I think this is the last slide. Oh no, I'm going to skip that one. This one I thought was interesting, and this is, we think, a result of inflation. But people are buying smaller sizes of honey right now, smaller containers. So instead of buying more expensive glass jars and larger jars, the general consumer is trading down and they're buying smaller containers. And really, when you have high inflation, you see that in all food. People start in general buying smaller quantities as they're trying to pinch pennies and make it to the next payday. So this is an interesting trend. It's been the other way around. When inflation is really low, people are really buying really bulk, large quantities. And certainly in inflationary periods, some people still do buy the 5-gallon bucket because it's cheaper by the pound. But your general consumer is looking at that price per ounce and it is buying smaller quantities. So overall, as we look at the honey industry for the last year, the good news is that honey consumption and preference remains really strong. The bad news is that the consumer is increasingly struggling the industry is increasingly struggled to compete with import honey pricing. As a beekeeper, you may or may not be aware, but we consume about 650 million pounds of honey in the US. We only produce about 120 million pounds. So the vast majority of honey eaten in the United States is imported honey. And overseas, they can produce honey far cheaper than we can. And so you can get imported honey oftentimes at a third of the cost of domestic honey. And so as consumption climbs higher and higher for honey, and our US production drops lower and lower, because that's what's been happening for the past many years, it gets harder and harder for the US the US producers to set the market price. And that's a continual problem we're seeing is the imports are continually setting the market price, and that makes it difficult for domestic producers to sell honey at a price that keeps them in business. So that's certainly a long-term issue that as an industry, we're trying to understand how to tackle that at the moment. Okay, so I threw a lot at you there about the honey board, but go to honey.com. Oh, I wanted to show you a quick video from the National Honey Board, and I'm going to show it to you real quick. The National Honey Board does a lot of videos as well as they do a lot of research, they do a lot of videos. So if you browse their website, here's a really cool video from a friend of mine, George Hansen, amazing beekeeper. And I just wanted to give you a sampling of some of the resources that you can find on the Honey Board website. And then you can use all these resources. They have a one page where it's got about 20 different printed materials that you can order for free. So every one individual can order like 200 free pamphlets per year. And so they've got 20 different pamphlets you can choose from, anywhere from coloring material for kids if you're a teacher, to flyers about how to use honey in cooking, to flyers about pollination if you're, stuff you can hand out at a farmer's market. And you can order all that material for free off of the National Honey Board. So if you go to their resource page. But anyway, this is super cool. I'm going to show you this video real quick because it's just a neat video. And there's dozens of these that, again, you can use with your consumers if you want to have a video playing on your table at your farmer's market.
Honeybees are so important. A third of the food we eat is pollinated by bees.
I've seen pictures where, you go to the grocery aisle and you just take away everything that bees had something to do with. It's pretty stark what's left.
I buy honey because I love it, but it's important to buy honey to keep our beekeepers in business because their bees pollinate so much of what we eat. I grow pears and cherries in the Upper Hood River Valley. I am the third person in my family to do this. We are farming the same land we've been farming for a century.
My name's George Hansen. I'm the owner of Foothills Honey Company, which specializes in pollination of agricultural crops.
George has been our beekeeper for more years than I can remember. It's an important partnership because without the bees, we don't have a crop.
Honeybees are the major pollinator of agricultural crops in the United States.
I have 150 acres of fruit, all of which needs to be pollinated within a month's period. But when you take it down to the level of the fruit itself, each piece of fruit represents a visit from a bee to a blossom. It's beautiful.
I have honestly never been in any of these orchards during harvest, ever before. So for me, it's kind of amazing. I can't even believe how much fruit there is on these trees. It's just incredible. It's really gratifying to know that our bees and our industry participate in the production of this food. If it weren't for the fact that there was honey, there wouldn't be very many beekeepers to start with. And when you buy honey, you're helping the beekeeper who is probably providing all kinds of services to you in the environment as well as in the food that you're eating.
Pretty cool, huh? I love those. So like I said, if you want to see a lot more of those videos, then you can always check out the National Honey Board website at honey.com. And there's a lot of amazing resources. They also have like thousands of recipes that use honey. So, okay, let's jump out in the bee yard and see what the bees are doing. And then we'll come back in here for a little more classroom time. So here we go.
Hey friends, so there's not a lot going on in the bees this time of year. You know, we're getting those daytime temperatures here in Texas anyway, in the 40s and 50s, and you know, nighttime temperatures in 30s and 40s. Today is pretty warm. It's about 60 degrees. I'm a little chilly. This is the one time I don't need this ventilated bee suit. If it's like below 75, I've got a long sleeve shirt on. So I'm a little chilly out here, but the bees are happy. You may or may not be able to see them, but they're flying pretty well out here in the bee yard. They're not doing much. There's not a lot for them to forage on. We've had a couple of freezes, so they're really not bringing in much pollen, but you'll really start to see this time of year those warm sunny days where the bees are out flying, and then the cool days where they stop flying and cluster in the hive. And that's very, very normal, and that's really the pattern we'll see throughout the rest of the year until February. So we're going to do some quick winter inspections. I'm going to go over how to do winter inspections, what you need to be looking for this time of year, how to feed your bees if they need to be fed, and then we'll just do some housekeeping things, you know, how to move a hive this time of year, how to replace equipment, how to rotate frames. So it'll be fun. But I'm usually only out here looking at bees on warmer days like this where it's 60 degrees or sunny, or that's my preference. You know, if my beehive is hungry, I'll still go and take a quick look even if it's 40 degrees. But when it's warm, that's a great time to do a little bit more of an in-depth inspection when you have these warm sunny days. So let's jump on in and see what's going on in these hives. When I'm doing a winter inspection, you know, the biggest thing I'm looking at is bee population, and I'm looking at the weight on a hive just to make sure they don't need to be fed. The quickest and easiest way to inspect a hive for their weight is just to do what we call a lift test. And that's where you just really lift up on the hive and see how heavy they are. And that gives you a pretty good feel for how much food they have. You know, it doesn't have to be exact, but this hive is pretty heavy, especially if I compare it to these other hives. You know, this is, I would guess there's 80 to 100 pounds of honey in here. And that can be enough. I mean, if you come out here on a warm, sunny day, you see a lot of bee activity in front of the hive. They're flying. You lift up on it, the weight feels good. Sometimes what I do is I crack the boxes apart. So I'll just quickly crack the boxes apart and take a quick look. Obviously, there's plenty of bees in there. They come boiling out. And that can be enough. And that may be the only winter check that I do over a month or so period. And if I want to go a little bit deeper, I can. You know, if it's a warm, nice day like this, then you can take the lid off, do a little bit deeper dive inspection and see what's going on inside. But again, I'm not really expecting to see brood. All I'm really looking for is bee population. I can quickly see the bee population is great on this hive. And again, you could open up a hive like this so you guys can see. I'm going to tilt it forward. You know, you can see there's lots of bees in here. You can open a hive like this quickly, you know, for a few minutes looking from the top. You know, even if it's 30 degrees and sunny, it's not going to hurt the bees if you just quickly look and then put the lid back on. You might want to put a weight on top of that lid because you don't want it blowing off. Once you've kind of broken that propolis or broken that burr comb like you saw I did when I opened this, they really had it stuck down and I kind of broke it open. That lid is much more prone to fly off in high winds. So weight that lid down if you're going to open it. You can see in this hive, I'll get the camera a little bit closer so that you can see. But you can actually see they've got all this propolis all around the edge. There we go. You can see all around the edges. They've got propolis everywhere. They've got burr comb up here that was holding that lid down. They've really kind of prepared themselves for winter very well, just to get everything sealed up and locked down. But this hive looks really healthy, and so I'm really not going to dig in to the hive because again, we've treated them for mites. I can feel that they've got plenty of weight. There's good bee population. They really don't need anything from me other than a pollen patty. I'm going to keep feeding pollen patties, through the month of November for sure, just to let them continue rearing just a little bit of brood as they wrap up brood production for the year. So that's really it for an inspection. I'm going to grab a pollen patty. And so here's my all-time favorite pollen patty, which is the global pollen patty. These are absolutely fantastic. And since this hive doesn't need feed, I'm not going to worry about putting a sugar brick on it. I'm not going to worry about giving them syrup. I'm just going to put that pollen patty right in between these two boxes. So I'm going to give the hive a little bit of smoke. I'm going to put this pollen patty right in the middle, just like that. Close them up. And I'll do that a couple more times in November, and I'm done. So winter inspection doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And then I'm going to strap this lid down so that it doesn't fly off, because now I've broken all their hard-earned propolis apart. But that's it for a winter inspection. It can be pretty quick, pretty simple. So let's say you are in the middle of winter or leading up to winter, but the daytime temperatures are already in the 50s and it's really starting to cool off, and your bees need feed. Now, if you've got a deep box full of bees and you've got 40, 50 pounds of stored honey in the box above them, they don't need food. So make sure your hive needs feed before you go off and feed them. But if you've got a hive that only has 20 pounds of food or 30 pounds of food, if they're a deep box full of bees and that top box only is half full, there's a good chance they're going to need some food. And it's better going into winter to err on the side of caution and give them a little bit too much food than not enough. Because going into winter, starvation is a very real problem. And so I err on the side of a little too much food this time of year. I'm not very worried about them backfilling the brood nest or becoming honey bound, just because they're not going to be rearing brood anyway this time of year. And so I'm okay with them kind of filling up the brood nest with syrup or sugar or whatever. Interesting side note, you can see all the bees around my veil. These are usually super gentle bees, but I definitely notice if you work bees on a warm sunny day in the winter, a lot of times they can be a little bit upset. So that's pretty normal. So the problem is, if you're trying to feed bees once daytime temperatures are in the 40s or 50s, they're just not going to go into a division board feeder or an entrance feeder and drink the syrup. They only are going to consume food that is essentially right on top of them, because they're not breaking that cluster and going and getting syrup. So if you feed them, it's got to be right on top of them for the winter months. So there's a number of things you can do. So remove the lid. You can leave your inner cover on, and you can get an empty deep box and you can put it right on top like that. And then you can get your Boardman feeder, your Boardman entrance feeder, fill it full of syrup, and just set it down in that hive right next to the hole in the inner cover. So you can see what I've done right there. Now, if this top box is full of bees, the bees will come up out of this inner cover, drink that syrup, and go right back down in. They don't have to travel far. If your bees are all in the bottom box, they're not going to come all the way up and eat that, and so you'll need to pick a different option. My preference, rather than leaving the inner cover on, is actually removing the inner cover. And you can see the top of this top box is full of bees. So I'm going to give them some smoke. You can put this Boardman feeder right on top of the top bars, or you can get 2 or 3 of these Boardman feeders and put them right on top of the top bars. Put your empty deep box back up on top, and then you put your lid on top of all of that. And so that gives your bees just a direct source of food with that top feeder, or that, well, we made it into a top feeder, but this Boardman feeder. This works. I'm not a huge fan of it, just because well, a couple of reasons. I mean, one is the bees still have to travel up inside here and drink the syrup. It's hard for them to suck it out. So it works, but it's not my favorite option. Another option is the Ziploc bag method. So you can get a Ziploc bag, fill it full of syrup, and drop it right on top of the hive just like that, and poke some holes into that bag, just with your hive tool, some small holes, and it actually won't leak out. So if the holes are at the top of the bag, you can see the syrup isn't leaking out. And the bees will climb up on top of that Ziploc bag and drink the syrup out as they need it. I kind of like this method because you can put 2 or 3 of these bags on top. The bees will come up, drink that syrup, pull it back down into the hive, and it's an effective way of feeding liquid food in the dead of the winter. You also don't have to put a whole deep box on top. You can use one of our internal sugar brick trays, flip it over, and put it right on top, and that gives you the space you need to put those Ziploc bags in there without having an entire deep box up on top of the hive. So that's a pretty cool method to feed a liquid syrup right up on top of the hive if you need to. Now, my other favorite method is use a sugar brick. So you guys have all seen and heard of Stan's soft sugar brick that we manufacture and make. And so these sugar bricks are fantastic. In the winter months, obviously you're gonna take it out of the bag, pull the cardboard off of it, and it'll go right up on top of the hive. And then you'll take one of our rims. In the summer months, we put this brick on this mesh and then put it on top of the hive, and that helps prevent small hive beetles from building a nest up underneath that brick. But in the winter months, small hive beetles really aren't a threat. And so again, remove this from the packaging. I'm not, because I don't want to get my hands all sticky right now while I'm trying to operate the camera. So you can put it directly on top, flip this tray over so the screen side is facing up, and it still leaves you plenty of room for getting that sugar brick underneath the screen, and then you can put your lid back up on top. I definitely recommend the sugar brick because it still has some protein in it. We put some protein in it. It has essential oils in it. The other cool thing is, as it sits on top of this hive, it also absorbs moisture because it's a dry sugar brick. And so if the hive is condensating, that condensation will get absorbed right into that sugar brick, which helps reduce the threat of any of that condensation dripping back down on the cluster, which is a big problem in especially more northern climates in the winter months. So my favorite method is using the sugar brick if you need to do winter feeding. Second favorite would be using the Ziploc bag method, and third favorite would be the Boardman feeder on top. You can also just fill the internal feeder, the division board internal feeder. You can fill that with syrup, but again, odds are the bees probably aren't going to break cluster and go down and drink it. Oh, and if your top box doesn't have a lot of bees in it and all your bees are in the bottom box, there's nothing wrong this time of year with flipping those boxes and putting most of the bees up on top so that you can feed bees right up on top like I demonstrated. I would not do that if your top box is full of honey. If your top box is full of honey, you don't really need to feed anyway. But if your top box doesn't have a lot of honey in it, say it only has 10, 15 pounds of honey in it, and all your bees are in the bottom box, you can reverse those boxes so all your bees are up top, which allows you to go ahead and feed from the top like I showed you. Let's talk a little bit about moving beehives. Now, moving bees is never fun, and it's really never easy, but it's often really important. I usually find that I'm needing to move bees in one of 3 ways, or one of 3 reasons. One is that I want to move this hive, a couple feet or 3 or 4 feet in this direction. Just a really short move. Maybe I'm, want to redo the stand, or I want to, move them from this flower bed to that flower bed 3 or 4 feet over. Those are pretty easy. The other situation is I want to move it, 100 feet away to the other side of my yard or property. That's the most complicated one. Or I want to move it to a whole new location that's, say, half a mile away. That one's easy too. If you're moving bees more than about a half of a mile, the bees are going to completely reorient to their new location, and you can just pick them up and move them. A cool day, the colder the better, whether it's 20, 30 degrees is great to move those bees, those longer distances, or even a shorter distance. If I'm just wanting to move this hive 4 or 5 feet in one direction, you can just pick it up and do that at any time. It's really not a big deal. The tricky thing is if I want to take this hive and I want to move it 20 feet that way, those forager bees are probably going to come back to this area, not recognize their hive, and they're going to go into this hive. So bees are going to go usually to the nearest hive of their old location if their original hive isn't there. So if I move this hive, 20 feet, all the foragers are going to end up in this hive. So that gets really tricky. If I were to move both of these hives 20 feet, that's a little better because then nobody knows where home is and they're going to reorient. They're going to recognize that hive 20 feet away and they're probably going to kind of drift evenly over there to those hives. So if you can use this to your advantage sometimes, if you're in the spring or summer months and I've got this hive that's really weak and this hive over here that's really strong, I can swap places with them. And then my foragers from my strong hive are going to end up going into the weak hive, and that can boost that weak hive strength. So you can use that to your advantage, just swapping hives, and that way you give a weak hive a boost to population. If you are trying to move beehives around in the winter months, it's awesome because the bees aren't flying as much. And that's really the key, is that even if it's 20 degrees outside, if this is a really strong hive and I start moving it around, bees will oftentimes come out. So you still want to suit up, close up the entrance loosely, and then get some help, lift that hive and move it to a new location. But be prepared for bees to come out. Or worst case scenario, you drop this hive, you crack the boxes apart, and then bees are really going to come out. I recommend, if you are going to move bees when it's really cold, strap that hive together really tightly so the boxes don't break apart. Because if those boxes do break apart, you drop everything and it's 20 degrees outside, any bee that falls out of the hive is going to die. It's going to freeze. So use a strap like this one, band it all the way around the hive, strap everything together really tightly so that doesn't happen. But other than that, moving bees in the cold is great because you aren't going to have, in general, 10,000, it's an exaggeration, not 10,000 bees, but you're not going to have 100 bees come out and try to sting you when you move them. But prepare just in case something goes wrong. I don't like moving bees if it's below about 20 degrees. If it's like in the teens or below freezing, any jostling, any bees that fall down onto the bottom board inside the hive, it's too cold for them to climb back up into the cluster and they're probably going to die. So kind of 20 to 40 degrees is your sweet spot, because at those temperatures, if it's a good strong hive, even if bees fall onto the bottom board, they'll still often crawl back up. It's warm enough that they'll crawl back up into the cluster. So 20 to 40 degrees is your sweet spot. You can move bees long distances or really short distances. If you're moving them 20 or 30 feet, ideally move all of your hives 20 or 30 feet rather than just one. If you do want to just move one and it's a really strong hive, you can oftentimes just pick it up and move it 20 or 30 feet. Yeah, the next warm day, those foragers might end up at this other hive. But again, if this is a really good, strong, healthy hive, it's not gonna cause an issue for them to lose, 3, 4, 5% of the bees to that neighboring hive. So, but overall, this is a great time of year if you need to move hives any distance. This time of year, I really like to start thinking about rotating frames. Once frames get old and dark, it's a good time to pull them out of the hive and throw them away and get new frames in your hive. And really my favorite time to pull them out of the hive is early spring, late winter, early spring, before the bees really start brooding up. But you can start preparing for it this time of year. Now, if a hive dies, which unfortunately happens, or you have a completely empty box, you can pull the old dark frames out and throw them away. That's not an issue. The tricky thing is if you have a hive that doesn't die for 2 or 3 years, which is kind of hard to do these days, but if you do have a hive that doesn't die for 2 or 3 years, you might want to try to rotate out old frames while the hive is still living. And so what I like to do is in the late fall, early winter, kind of right where we are now, I'll go through a hive and I'll identify the old dark frames. So this hive really only has one old dark frame. and I'll show it to you. So this is an old frame. You can see the wood's pretty old. The comb is pretty dark in color. It's not terrible, but it's not great. I'm gonna go ahead and swap it out. And by the way, you can see this is completely capped honey, and it kind of has a white, it's a little bit white on top. That's very common to see in the winter months. They kind of get this white patina on the capped honey, and that's pretty normal. But, so I've identified a frame I want to rotate out. As long as it does not have any brood on it, and it's just a frame of honey like this one, I'm going to get it all the way to the outside of my box. So I'm just going to get it on the very outside frame, and I'm just going to leave it just like that. What's going to happen is if the bees need that food, it's there for them all winter. I don't want to throw away a frame full of honey because the bees might need it. So I'm going to leave it in there, and then I'm going to come back, you know, late winter, early spring, as the bees are starting to brood up, flowers are starting to bloom, and I'm going to check on this frame. And if it's full of honey still or not, I'm going to pull out that frame. If it's full of honey, I'll set it out, let the bees rob the honey out of it, and then I'll throw it away. But that way it's on the outside edge. If it were closer into the middle, there's a good chance in the late winter, early spring, the queen is going to start laying eggs in that frame. And then I don't want to throw it away because now it has, you know, eggs or larvae or brood all over it, or the bees have started filling that valuable early pollen in on that frame. But on the outside edge, now I've guaranteed that it's there over the winter if the bees need that honey, or, and I've guaranteed that I can pull it out and get rid of it in the late winter, early spring before the queen starts laying brood on it. So that's what I do. You know, if you have 2 or 3 frames of old frames you want to get rid of, as long as they don't have brood on them, right now, shuffle them to the outside edges, and then you can pull them out and throw them away in a few months. So it's pretty simple. That's all you have to do, and you can do that in both boxes. And it's great to kind of always be rotating those old frames to the outside edge so that you can get rid of them. Usually I recommend rotating comb about every 10 years. If you buy bees in a nook or a single story hive, they're probably going to have some old frames mixed in, and so you can go ahead and start rotating those out. But about every 10 years is what I consider best management practices to rotate out those old dark frames. If you get a new hive or new equipment, I recommend getting a Sharpie and writing the year on the tops of the frames, and that'll help you rotate out those old frames and know what year they were brand new. So hopefully that helps and helps you get rid of some of those old frames, which can be a little more contaminated and heavy with that old wax. And this is a great method to get them rotated out if the hive doesn't die. Let's talk about what to do when you need to rotate out equipment. So this box has been really bothering me because the joint is coming undone here, and every time I come out to the bee yard, you know, this joint is a little bit wider, and so I really want to get rid of this box or get it back to the shop, fix it, and replace it with another box. How to do that? It's pretty simple. You can do it any time of the year. Ideally, pick a day that's warm, because we're going to cause a lot of bees to fly around, and I don't want them to get trapped outside while it's still cold and die. So, you know, 60 degrees or above and sunny. Give the hive a fair amount of smoke, and then you're going to get your new box ready. So I've got a brand new deep box right here. I'm going to set it right over here. And the only key is that you want to keep the frames in the same order that they were originally in. So I'm just going to start with the outside frames, and I'm going to pick up one at a time. I'm just going to transfer them directly over into the new box in the same order they were. Once I get that first frame out, I'm going to go 2 frames at a time, and that's less disruptive on the bees because now they don't have to get out of my way as much, so it's much less disruptive. 2 frames at a time. Keep transferring everything over in the same order. The quicker you work, the better. It's just less disturbing or less disturbance for the bees. I keep transferring. There's some brood there in the middle. Keep those frames pushed tightly together so they don't draw out too much burr comb. Transfer over that last frame. Push all the frames tightly together. I'm going to give this hive a little bit more smoke. I'm going to make sure that my queen isn't on the outside edge of this box. Looks like she isn't. I'm going to knock any leftover bees off. And then I'm going to put my brand new box right back up on top. So simple as that. It doesn't have to take more than a couple of minutes to swap out that new equipment. I always like to have a couple of new boxes ready to go so I can swap them out. And then the other box, whatever the issue is, as long as it's not completely rotted, you can just take it back to your workshop, fix whatever the issue was, and then keep this as a spare box next time you need to make a repair.
So there you go, folks. That is the end of the bee yard portion. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful. I sometimes struggle with what to talk about in the bee yard, but there was lots of topics this month to go over. December is going to be interesting because it's often too cold to get out into the bee yard. So I think we're going to do some indoor stuff for once. And instead of going out to the bee yard, I think for December we'll do some indoors, some honey bottling stuff, and some other fun stuff indoors for December. Okay, so getting into our November tips, in most regions, you're not seeing a lot blooming. I mean, I know even as far south as Texas, we had some hard freezes over the past couple of weeks. And so you're really seeing a decline in fall blooms. I did see out in the bee yard, I saw a couple of bees bringing in some orange pollen, but by and large, there was not much coming in. If you're way down in Southeast Texas or right along the Gulf Coast somewhere, you'll probably still have a bit of a pollen flow, but it's not dramatic unless you're in Florida. And in most areas, our fall pollen flow is just about done. But as I was going through some of the bees today, I still saw some hives with 2 or 3 frames of good brood. And so that's why I do still like to leave those pollen patties on through November to just make sure they finish raising that final round of brood properly. And that will keep those bees hatching will be the generation that carries us through the winter. I love showing these. I think, what do they say? A weatherman is the only career you can have where you can lie all the time and not get fired. It's so true. But if we're going to predict, here's the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. I start watching that, especially this time of year. Well, I'm kind of a weather guy, so I watch it all the time. But for a beekeeper, the weather radar is like our stock market. So when I'm watching the weather forecast, that's my stock market. So I watch all these different maps all the time, and I thought this one was interesting. I mean, we are in an El Nino, and so that does affect things quite a bit. And so you can see it's going to be relatively warm to normal through most of the country, except up in the Northeast, where central north and Northeast it's going to be a little bit cooler. And then kind of the same for the longer range 8 to 14 day outlook. We're staying near normal or slightly above. Sorry, skipped on me there. In most cases, but the Northeast starts getting pretty chilly. So there's a lot of prediction of pretty cool weather across a lot of the country later this winter, but we shall see. This is a drought map. It looks better except for poor Louisiana. A lot of areas look a little better now than they did a month ago. Still some pretty severe drought through a lot of the South and the central US, as you can see. And, this time of year, we might ask, why does it matter? And it matters because the fall rain this time of year can often impact what kind of blooms we're going to have next spring. So not always, and it depends on your flowers, but it certainly is worth, as a beekeeper, starting to watch this a little bit. If you're in an area with a severe drought, and you have been for a long time, and that persists through the winter, it probably is going to impact your honey production next year. There are some exceptions to that, like if you get into Southeast Texas and parts of Louisiana where a lot of their blooms come from trees, it might not impact you quite as much as long as you start getting rains in the spring. But like up in the Midwest, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, where you have a lot of clover, that clover sprouts in the fall. And when you get a lot of fall rains, it often predicts a really strong honey flow in the summer. So Where a lot of my bees go during the summer is right up here. Well, actually, so if you look at this map of North Dakota, a lot of my bees are in the northeast corner. So we're in a decent drought there. And then, but they also go kind of lower and lower North Dakota and the northwest, and those areas look fantastic. So that's encouraging. So kind of current conditions, what I'm seeing is pretty much the end of bee season for most regions. Cooling temperatures are certainly causing reduced brood production. In a lot of hives, you may not see any brood at all. And don't panic if you see that. We'll talk about that more later. And then a wide variation pollen flow from absolutely none to a small trickle. Hive growth is largely ended. You can still have hives maintain their strength. You know, if they've still got 2 or 3 frames of brood, you're feeding them some pollen patties, they can kind of maintain that strength, but you're generally not going to see growth, and kind of whatever your hive is now is as good as it's going to get. And it will probably just decline in strength from here until next spring. This is some pictures of what I'm seeing in the hive. You know, you're seeing, especially like this picture on the far right and the far left, the honey section of the frame is growing, and the brood section is crunching down to a smaller and smaller area of brood. And that's pretty normal as those brood frames start filling with nectar or honey or syrup, and you start seeing a diminished brood production. I did want to ask you guys though, so a quick poll. I want to ask you guys what you are seeing when you're looking at your bees. So I just launched this poll here. How many frames of brood are you seeing in your bees? So last time you checked on your bees, what are you seeing on average? No brood whatsoever, 1 to 2 frames, 3+ frames of brood. And most of the hives I looked at today, it was kind of in that 1 to 2 frames of brood. I saw like one really strong hive that had 5 or 6 frames of brood, but most, didn't have a whole lot. So curious what you guys are seeing. So it looks like about 10% of you are seeing no brood at all. So 10% of you are seeing 0 brood, perfectly normal this time of year. 67%, so the vast majority are seeing 1 to 2 frames of brood, and 24% of you are seeing 3+ frames of brood. So the vast majority of you are in that 1 to 2 frame of brood range, which is exactly what I was seeing too. So 1 to 2 frames of brood, you're in good company. So just by way of reminder, what does your hive need to survive the winter? So if you're in the southern half of the United States, you need about 30, 40 pounds of excess honey in their second box, and then 10 to 20 pounds in their bottom box. This is for a strong hive. So this is for a hive that's at least a deep box full of bees or more. If you're in the northern half of the United States, you're probably going to need an additional 20 pounds. So you're going to need more like 70 pounds of honey, and 70 to 80 pounds of honey. You need mites under 2 per 100 bees, so you need to have dealt with your mites. I talk to so many people that say, oh, I bought mite-resistant queens and they did terrible, and my bees, they're dying. That you always have to do something about mites. Mite-resistant queens that are good enough to just not treat for mites do not exist if you're just buying queens. Now, there's a few people that raise their own queens in rural areas and have made it work for their small operations where they're breeding from their own stock year over year. But that's just not available to go buy. And if you do, it diminishes very quickly. So I always try to remind people, don't buy bees from anybody, anywhere, and just expect not to have to deal with mites. So you got to deal with mites. Sufficient bee population. So minimum is 5 to 6 frames of bees. So you got to have a hive that's at least 5 or 6 frames of bees or more, or they're probably not going to survive. And then, of course, a healthy laying queen. And this is so they can come out of the winter and that queen can start laying in January. Final feeding, I'm going to skip that. We've talked a lot about feeding. Winter feeding options. So we touched on this in the video. So this is just a quick reminder. You can do sugar cakes, sugar bricks, fondant. Some people do. I think somebody mentioned in the comments early on, but you can do a candy board, and these are a lot of fun to do. You can get a board that kind of looks like the telescoping outer cover, and you can kind of pour a molten melted candy in there and let it sit and harden. And then you can put that on top of the hive and then put a lid over that. And it's just, a brick of sugar, kind of like a massive sugar brick on top of the hive that the bees can eat on all winter long. So those work great. Sugar, the stand soft sugar bricks that we sell, those work great. You can, if you're in a more northern climate, you can just get, 3 or 4 of those sugar bricks and break them up and make them fit on top of a hive, put the rim on it, and then put a lid on it, and you're good to go all winter if you're not in an area where you can access your hive um, to feed them throughout the winter. So sugar cakes, fondant, sugar bricks, good options. We talked about the Ziploc bag. Some people get a chicken feeder. So in the video, I showed you guys how to use a Boardman feeder with the feeder with the jar. You can stick that on top of the hive. Some people get a chicken feeder and put it on top of the hive inside that empty deep box. Not a huge fan of that because sometimes it has a pretty big lip on it. The bees really have to work to crawl up and into it, and you can kind of have drowning issues. But some people do it. You can also place frames of honey from other hives on either side of the cluster. So you would not want to put a frame of honey in the middle of the cluster of bees. You don't want to break them up like that. But you could go to the frames right where the cluster ends. So if the cluster's on the middle 3 frames, you could pull the frames out that are empty on either side of the cluster, replace those with frames of honey. Maybe if you had a hive die, you could put those frames of honey there, and you can give them their honey, and that works as well. Pollen substitute, again, I would plan on feeding 2 to 3 pounds of pollen substitute for strong hives during November. Once we start getting really routine freezes and the bees are really clustered during the day is when I typically stop feeding pollen substitute. So depending on where you are, that may already be happening. If you're in the southern half of the United States, you've got a while before daytime temperatures are near freezing. So you've got a bit to continue feeding that pollen substitute. Entrance reducers and screen bottom boards, always a bit of a controversial topic, if you will, especially the screen bottom board part. But I really recommend with entrance reducers, go ahead and put those on pretty much anywhere in the country. So it's time. We've got daytime temperatures below about 60 degrees. And usually when we have daytime temperatures below 60 is when I recommend you start putting on those entrance reducers. So I go ahead and start putting those on. If you don't put it on, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to dramatically affect the health of your hive. I actually prefer more of a mouse guard than an entrance reducer. I'm more worried about mice getting in there and making a mess in the winter than I am about reducing that entrance size. So mouse guards are a good idea. And then if you have a screen bottom board, you don't have to cover it. You just want to make sure that cold wind cannot blow up under the hive and chill that hive during the winter months. So you can block off both sides of your hive stand so cold wind cannot blow up under it. And if you do that, you don't have to cover it. You can also get that insert and slide it in there if you want to cover the screen, but it's not absolutely critical. We've got a couple of videos on our YouTube channel if you want to go check those out about all the different ways to overwinter with a screen bottom board. Combining hives. This is so sad, but it happens. We all have a hive that looks like this one in the picture where you've just got really this little ball of bees left, and they're just not going to make it to the winter. Now, last month I showed a video on how to take those bees and put them into a wooden nook box. So we sell wooden nook boxes, and you can overwinter these small hives more successfully in a wooden nook box. So you could take those frames of bees out, transfer them into the wooden nook box, and it's just a smaller space. The bees stay a little bit warmer. They tend to overwinter a little better in nook boxes. That works if you've got, I would say 3 or 4 solid frames of bees. Then you can successfully overwinter in a nook box. If you've got under 3 frames of solid bees, you don't have to combine them with another hive. You can just leave them and see if they survive the winter, but they're probably not. This picture here, that hive isn't going to make it. I mean, you can see they're not even covering an entire frame. It's 1, 2, 3. It's about 4 frames of bees, but they're only covering half of those frames. So if you were to kind of extrapolate that out across all the frames, you're really looking at about 2 frames covered in bees, and that's just not going to make it. So the best thing to do would be to combine that with another hive, and that gives them the best chance of together surviving the winter. So again, when you're looking at does it need to be combined, you're going to count all the frames of bees and all the boxes. I'm not talking about just one box. Look at both boxes, and it's how many frames of bees there are combined in the whole hive that determine whether or not you should combine them. So under 3 frames of bees, go ahead and combine them with another hive. As far as how to do that, it varies. What I do like to do is I do like to find the queen in the weakest hive and kill her, because might have been something wrong with her. That hive wasn't doing very well. Good chance it was because the queen wasn't great. So go ahead and kill her and combine it with a stronger hive. Now, I also make sure that I do not have a varroa mite problem. So if you didn't treat for varroa mites at all, I wouldn't combine hives, because there's a good chance if you didn't treat in any way that little bitty weak hive is dying from varroa mites. And the last thing you want to do is combine an infested hive with a stronger hive that's surviving. So if you treat it for mites and you're not worried about mites, then you can take that smaller hive, combine it with a bigger hive, and together they should survive. So kill the queen in the smaller hive. You can do a dirty combination where you just stick the 2 boxes together, and that typically works just fine. If you want to be super careful, you can put a sheet of newspaper between the 2 hives when you combine them, poke a few holes in the newspaper, and let them kind of slowly combine over a few days. If it's in the dead of winter, sometimes they kind of never combine. They can actually just stay in their respective boxes and not combine. Usually when I'm combining bees, I just stick them together and skip the newspaper. And you might have a dozen or 2 bees that kind of fight, but it's pretty minimal. Combining the whole box or just frames, if you're combining that small hive with a deep box completely full of bees, again, you can just stick it on top and let them combine over the course of a few days, and then go back a few days later, and that top box will probably be empty, and you can remove it and store it for the winter. If you've got 2 hives that neither one are full of bees, you can just take the frames with bees from the one of the hives and combine it, put those frames, pull the empty frames out of this other hive, take the frames out of this hive and swap them. And you can just kind of combine frames of bees. I've also, if there's no brood at all, sometimes I've just shaken the bees out of the weak hive into the stronger hive. And that works as well. So it's relatively easy this time of year to combine hives without a lot of fighting going on. So sometimes quick and easy is the ticket, and it gets the job done instead of not doing it at all. This was a couple years ago, but I was doing that in one of our bee yards, and it's so painful. I'm so bad at doing this because I am such a softie when it comes to combining hives. I'm always going through hives. I'm like, you know what? Maybe that one will pull through. Maybe that one's okay. And I'm a little too generous, and so I have to be hard on myself and go, no, you know what? The value is in the comb. A package of bees to restart next year is relatively inexpensive, or a swarm or a split. If that hive's not going to make it, combine it with another one, save the comb, and then you can use it next year to get a jump start. I mean, half the battle in beekeeping is getting that drawn comb. And once you've got that drawn comb, whether you start over with a swarm or a package or dropping a nook in it, or making a split from a strong hive that survived, that comb makes all the difference in year 2. So take your losses, do the combines you need to do, and move on. Speaking of boxes, excess winter boxes. This is a common question. How many boxes should I leave on my hives and going into the winter? So here's kind of some key concepts or key rules that I live by when it comes to how many boxes should I leave on my hives. If a box is mostly full of honey and it's 25% or more full of bees, leave it. leave it all winter. You're good. You want to make sure each hive has at least 30 to 40 pounds in second or third boxes. More honey than that is okay. I'm not usually pulling boxes full of honey off my hives unless there's just no bees in it whatsoever and it's a really weak hive. Then I will. I might take that entire box of extra honey and put it on a stronger hive. So they've got all the honey they need. If a box is less than 25% full of bees and already has plenty of honey in other boxes, you can remove it. So again, if you've got 4 boxes high on a hive and the bees are only, in the bottom box, yeah, you can pull some of those upper boxes of honey off and give them to other hives, extract it, store it for next year, etc. Just like that comb is really valuable, frames of honey are super valuable too. You can use them next year when you split, or if you capture a swarm, you want to see a happy swarm or a happy package, dump them in a box that already has 2 or 3 frames of honey in it from last year, and they'll go crazy. If you do remove boxes, you can store those in wax melt crystals until next spring. If it wasn't exposed to chemicals, you can harvest it or eat it. Again, just making sure that, or you can set it 30 to 40 feet away from your hive and let the bees rob it out on those warm days. A quick side note though, well, 2 quick things. If you're leaving boxes of honey out to be robbed out this time of year, it's going to take the bees a while because we only have so many warm days where they can go out and forage. And things like raccoons and possums and mice love boxes of honey. So be careful if you're leaving your boxes of honey out. Keep a close eye on them. If you don't have any warm weather, don't bother, because in 1 or 2 nights, raccoons can make a total mess and chew up all that hard-earned honeycomb and just make a huge mess of it. The other thing is, if you don't want to store boxes of honey in wax moth crystals, this time of year, if you're pulling boxes of comb or honey off of a hive this time of year and it doesn't already have wax moth damage, as long as you store it somewhere where it's not warm, you don't have to be treating with wax moth crystals once you have nighttime temperatures below freezing. So if you can maybe take that comb off while it's already cold outside, put it in one of our super bags, zip it up, and then you really don't have to worry about wax moths as long as it's stored in a garage or a shed or somewhere where it's getting cold at night. Wax moths aren't a huge issue this time of year. Let's see, we already talked about that. This is another thing that you might run into. It's certainly something I get a lot of questions on, and is my hive queenless? And I apologize. Instead of October, that should say November, not October. I forgot to change that. So is your hive queenless in October? So here is, if you're sure that it is queenless, here's what you can do. Now, I want to caveat this with a lot of people are concerned about their hive being queenless because they see no brood. That's normal. The queen is shutting down this time of year. What you should do is compare a hive with all your others. If you've got one hive with 0 brood, no eggs, no larvae, and it's a similar strength to all the other hives in your apiary and all your other hives have lots of brood, okay, now you're in trouble. But if you're going through your yard and like, this hive is really weak and it doesn't have any brood, they probably just shut down early. Or, hey, half my bees have brood, the other half doesn't, you're probably just fine. So if all your hives have 4 frames of brood and then this one hive, again, same strength, has no brood, yeah, it's probably queenless. So if that happens, if they're less than 1 deep box full of bees, just combine them with another hive. That's the best thing you can do this time of year. If they're more than 1 box full of bees, you can try to overwinter them as normal. And you need to be prepared early next spring, early March, late February, give them a few frames of brood from a stronger hive to let them raise their own queen. Now, if you go this route, here's another thing I recommend. Get some vials of queen pheromone or swarm lure. We sell this as well. Get a vial of swarm lure, a swarm commander, etc. And keep it in that hive, replace it every couple of weeks, and that will help prevent the hive from becoming a drone layer. Because if a hive goes too long without a queen, the worker bees will start laying eggs. Now they won't in the dead of winter, but they might once you start coming out of winter in the late winter, early spring. So starting January, throw some of those vials of queen pheromone in there, and that'll suppress that urge for the worker bees to become drone layers. And then as soon as you've got a hive, they can sacrifice a frame of eggs and larvae, put it in there, and hopefully they'll raise their own queen. The other option is find a fellow beekeeper with a very small, weak hive that does have a queen and combine it with yours. Or if you do have one of those small, weak hives that does have a queen, combine it with a stronger one. Now you've got a queen right hive. So that's what you should do if you are showing up queenless. Winter inspections. I'm just going to throw this slide up. We talked about it in the video, but I like these parameters here that you can see in writing. If you're looking at your hives, try to spend less than 1 minute and don't pull frames out. If you are, about 32 degrees or below. I'm supposed to say below 32 degrees. Man, I could not type when I was preparing this, apparently. So if it's below 32 degrees, spend less than a minute. Don't pull frames out. If it's 40 degrees, sunny, you can spend more than a minute. You can pull out a frame or two, just spend a couple minutes looking. If it's 50 degrees, sunny and above, you can pull out several frames, do a more intense inspection. Here's the other parameter I really recommend. If it's do an inspection during the heat of the day. Even if it's 30 degrees, do it during the heat of the day when it's sunny. This gives the hive time to recluster. Any bees that fell out can make their way back into the hive. And instead of doing an inspection right before sunset, when any bees that fall out aren't going to find their way back into the hive, they're going to die overnight. Keep in mind, it's always better to look than not. So I know people get worried when it's cold. If you're worried about your hive or you haven't done an inspection for a while, it's better to crack that lid, lift that box, make sure they have food, give them another sugar brick. That's so important. It's not that damaging for bees to take a quick look when it's chilly outside. It just doesn't. They're just going to recluster. It's not a big deal. This picture, I've got to explain it since I threw it up there. This was several years ago in March. We were splitting bees in the early spring. We had a bunch of queens coming, so we had to make splits, but the weather was terrible. It was like upper 30s, raining, terrible conditions to make splits. And so we had this idea where we took this tent with a little propane heater inside of it, and we blasted this propane heat. We would do the split on one pallet of bees, and then when we finished, we would pick up the whole tent, move it over another pallet of bees, and make a split. It actually worked really well. It was like 60 degrees inside that little tent with that propane torch blasting. And then any of the bees that flew out, as you can see, were clustering on that tent. And so whenever we did a split and found a hive that needed some more bees, we would just go scoop up a bucket of bees off the tent and dump them in that weaker hive. Actually worked out pretty well. It was a really cozy way to do some splits. It was nice as a beekeeper because we actually stayed pretty warm. So how often and when to inspect at this time of year? I would say on average 2 times per month, November through January. November, you're going to be adding pollen substitute, checking cluster size, feed if needed, maybe combining. Not much happens December and most of January. If you're in a northern climate, not much is going to happen in February either. Sometime late in March, you'll start taking some action. But, those inspections, November, December, January, are really quick. It's checking on food, giving them some more food, seeing maybe if you need to combine. That's about it. It's 1 to 2 minute inspections until January. You know your hives. So if you've got a hive you're worried about, hey, I've got that one hive out there. It's really light. It doesn't have enough food. You might need to go give them a little bit of food once a week through the month of November. But November is kind of your very last time to do your final housekeeping, making sure they're stocked up with food, giving them pollen patties, doing combines. December, it's just too cold. And let's face it, all we want to do is sit inside and eat cookies and think about Christmas. So, December is just not a very fun time for bees. Now, December is super cool when it comes to melting wax and making soaps and lip balms and bottling honey and giving it away for presents. And we'll be talking about a lot of that in our December webinar where, hey, what can we do with all this honey and all these products that we have that are left over? In the few minutes we have left, just some slides on common things that I hear about this time of year. You know, my hive died, what happened and why. You know, the combs in your dead hive are great, give you a lot of clues as to why the hive died. A lot of you take pictures of what's going on in your hive and text them to us at TBS. Keep doing that. You know, if you have a hive that died, pull some of the frames out of the very center of the hive, take some pictures, text it to us, and we're happy to help diagnose, give it our best guess why that hive died. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So if you have questions for us, take pictures, send it to us, and we'll help you diagnose what's going on or what happened. But when I see frames like this, you know, with a little bit of brood in the middle, cat brood, you know, that gives me a clue that the hive probably didn't die from being queenless. If I don't see any honey stored, it could have starved. So that's always a possibility. The other possibility is that it died and that honey got robbed out. So that's a possibility. In general, I would blame this hive's death on probably varroa mites, assuming I was confident they didn't starve to death. So this particular hive, I knew they didn't starve to death. The honey just got robbed out. And so when I see some brood, not a lot, but some cat brood left over, and the bees are all gone and it's dead, I usually blame that on varroa mites because it wasn't queenless. I don't see any evidence of brood disease. You can see some of these cells, the bees were starting to uncap that brood, probably hygienic behavior, trying to get rid of it because it was infested with mites. You don't usually see a lot of brood disease in this time of year. So this hive probably died from varroa mite infestation. If you see this, if any of you can guess, I wish I could unmute you guys, but I don't think I can on a webinar. But if you guess what's wrong with this picture, if you want to put it in the chat, I'm curious if you guys can see what's wrong with this frame. So put some answers in the chat, and let's see if you guys can guess. You've got lots of bees, you've got lots of brood, but what's up with? Yeah, you guys are way too experienced to beekeepers. Everybody's guessing it instantly. Yeah, you've got drone brood. So if you look carefully, you've got no. You might have a little bit of worker bee brood in the center here, but you pretty much got all drone brood. And so now the interesting thing is there's a difference, and some of you recognize this in the chat. There's a difference in a drone layer. There's a difference in workers laying drone brood and a queen that is run out of sperm and it's just laying drones. And so in this picture, and some of you may have guessed this, I would say this hive still has a queen. This hive is still queen right, but the queen has failed. She is no longer able to lay worker brood and she's laying drone brood. And that can be a little tricky to diagnose because, again, you still got lots of brood, lots of bees. But if you look carefully, kind of down here in the lower left, you still have some worker bee brood. And in the very center here, you've still got some worker bee brood. But then you've got all this drone brood mixed in, and you've got more drone brood than worker bee brood. And when you see entire frames full of drone brood like this, it's an indicator that it's a queen laying. Usually if it's a laying worker, sometimes you'll see a very prolific laying worker, or there's always more than one. There's usually dozens, but it's usually not as compact as this, and it's not this much. So laying workers, usually you're going to see a dozen eggs in each cell. You're going to see very shotgun patterns scattered all over the place. If it's a drone laying queen, you're going to have a little more of a compact pattern like you see here. You may still see a little bit of worker bee brood mixed in, and you're still only going to see like one egg per cell. So if it's a queen that's failed, you can just kill that queen and replace her, and your work is done. If it's worker bees laying, that's when it's better to just shake the bees out, store everything, and start over next year, because it's extremely difficult to salvage a hive that's full of a couple dozen laying workers. If you can put a new queen in, odds are they're just going to kill her. But if it's a laying queen, you can just replace her. I'm going to skip that. Well, I'll give you the answer. Well, I'll let you guys answer. So what in the chat, what's wrong with this hive? What's going on here with this hive? What are all those little white things on the bottom board? Any guesses in the chat box? I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because this is really a springtime thing. Um, Steve got it, and Christy got it. It's chalk brood. So these are chalk brood mummies, and this is usually what we see in the spring. You don't really see it in the fall much, but these mummies are actually kind of hard. And so if you were to pick one up, they would be not super hard, but they'd be way harder than a larva should be, and they're going to be kind of dried and mummified. And usually you see it in the frames, and you see it on the bottom board, and it's chalk brood. Usually once the spring warms up and it becomes warmer in the summer, chalk brood goes away. Bananas, believe it or not, tend to help with chalk brood. Essential oils can help a little bit. Microbials can help a little bit. There's a number of things that can help with chalk brood, but and let's see, I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to skip a few of these. I wanted to touch on this one really quick. Oops, sorry, because it was a little more relevant to this time of year. This is a video, but it's not playing for me. So this is actually a barrel of honey, but picture it the bucket or something. And this video is me stirring this barrel, and it's like water thin. It's this crazy, crazy thin honey. It's really high moisture honey. And so you might see that some as you've harvested honey, you've got it in a bucket. This time of year, sometimes that honey will start getting a little tangy. It'll taste a little fermented, and you're like, what's wrong with my honey here? And it's often that the moisture is too high and it's starting to ferment. And the best thing you can do is dry it. And there's a number of ways you can do that. I think, Sherry, I know there are some articles in the magazine about how to dry honey. I don't remember what issue. If you remember, feel free to chime in. But there's a number of different ways you can dry your honey out if it's starting to get that tangy taste. One, you can always freeze it. You can just stick it in the freezer, and that will halt the fermentation.
Probably in August issue, Blake.
August issue. Okay, thank you, Sherry. So yeah, if you have this problem, go check out the August issue. But I found two simplest ways to get that moisture out is if it's in a 5-gallon bucket. If you have a way that you liquefy honey, so if you've got an ice chest or an old refrigerator with a light bulb in it to heat and liquefy honey, put that 5-gallon bucket of honey in that hot box, take the lid off, put it up to about 120 degrees, and leave it in there for 3 or 4 days. Stir it a couple times a day, and that'll start sucking that moisture out of it. You can go the opposite route. If you've got a room, you can chill. If you can get a room that's really chilled with air conditioning, it can also suck that moisture out. So if you've got the air conditioning cranked down, or if your house is really low in humidity, you can just leave the lid off of that bucket, put a screen over it to keep it clean, and stir it a couple times a day, and it tends to suck the moisture out of it over time as well. So quick note, guys, before I let you go, there is a survey on, so when this webinar ends, it's going to pop up a survey. It's like a 1-question survey. Super appreciate it if you guys can fill that out. It's just asking some questions about how we can improve as a company. I love getting constructive criticism. And so I super appreciate if you guys fill that out. Probably not tomorrow, because I'm speaking at the Texas Beekeepers Conference tomorrow, but Saturday or Monday, you guys will all get a follow-up email with recordings, links to the magazine, links to the recording, products we talked about, all that good stuff will come via email. And with that, we will see you in December. Can't believe it's December, but we're going to be talking about some really fun stuff with honey and wax, etc. in December. And have a wonderful Thanksgiving. We won't see you guys till then, so have a great Thanksgiving. And we can't wait to see you in December. So have a great fall, guys. See you later.